Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, a 13-year flow of U.S. technology to Iran takes a hit. U.S. authorities charging 4 Chinese nationals for allegedly smuggling American parts to sanctioned Iranian entities. Could a recent CBS News article land the company in legal trouble? A U.S. lawmaker is accusing it of aiding Chinese propaganda, violating the truth, and a potential breach of U.S. sanctions. A warning to automakers like Tesla from a major human rights group. It's reminding car makers to keep materials tied to forced labor out of their supply chains when it comes to building cars inside China. And how is Washington preparing for a potential invasion of Taiwan? A closer look at how a round of critical military drills help arm Australia and the Pacific region against Beijing's threat. A huge amount of U.S. technology allegedly went to supporting Iran. The Justice Department charged 4 Chinese nationals Tuesday. That's over allegedly smuggling U.S.-made electronic parts to sanctioned Iranian entities. These parts could be used for making ballistic missiles and drones. Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism, and Washington has slapped economic sanctions on the nation, aiming to cripple the Iranian regime. But Iran has close relations with Beijing. China has risen as Iran's biggest oil and trading partner. It has also helped Iran with its technological development. The indictment represents the latest effort by U.S. authorities to counter Chinese threats on U.S. soil. Back in October, FBI Director Chris Wray warned about Beijing's active attempts to steal American intellectual property and bring it back to China and other foreign adversaries. Over the last several years, the agency has seen a 1,300% increase in economic espionage cases with links to China. Back to the indictment of the Chinese nationals, authorities said the defendants used front companies in China and Hong Kong to funnel the flow, and the effort lasted at least 13 years, from 2007 to 2020. If convicted, they face up to 35 years in prison. The DOJ has issued arrest warrants, though the suspects currently live in China. To discuss more about concerns of smuggling sensitive U.S. technology to Iran's military, we sat down with Andrew Thornbrook, national security correspondent for the Epoch Times. Andrew Thornbrook, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Tiffany. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, the Justice Department has charged 4 Chinese nationals on Tuesday. This is for allegedly smuggling U.S.-made electronic parts to sanctioned Iranian entities. Now, the concern is that these parts could be used for making ballistic missiles and drones. How concerning is all of this?
This is one instance in which we have numerous individuals who, over the course of more than a decade, essentially exploited loopholes in the U.S. Export regime to take sensitive technologies out of the U.S. into China, where they then forward them to Iran. This is not the first time. So even just last year, we also had another similar case with parts being exported for potential use in weapons of mass destruction in Iran. So this is an ongoing issue, and it is quite concerning.
On that note, the indictment said that the defendants used front companies in China and Hong Kong to then funnel the flow, and that the effort lasted at least 13 years. So given that time frame, why did it take this long to discover it, and how does that bespeak of the differences between, say, the U.S. and China when it comes to handling cases like this?
So there's always the question of how long was the fact-finding and evidence building taking. It's unclear how long we knew exactly that these were actually ending up in Iran, for example. But yeah, it's quite concerning. There's other cases similar, like the one I just spoke of with the WMDs last year, that also went on for decades. That one goes back to the 90s. And so these have spanned multiple administrations in the United States. They've spanned multiple leaders in both Iran and China. So it's something that we have to really be focused on and trying to curb right now.
And how does all of this fit into the new axis of evil that Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell was speaking of last year?
Yeah, I think this has been on our radar for some time, right? We've been sort of dealing with this concept of the new axis with China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia for probably 20 years now. And this is something that we're going to have to look out for, right? We just had former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, for example, testifying before Congress that Iran and China are explicitly coordinating for the purpose of undermining the U.S. and for stretching our resources thin. So really, the question now is going to become, I think, why were these technologies allowed to be exported to China in the first place? You know, why is it the case that we were allowing such a sensitive technology to flow to the Chinese Communist Party, but only got upset about it when it went from there to Iran?
Andrew Thornbrook, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me, Tiffany. It's a pleasure to be here.
Next, Senator Marco Rubio is accusing news agency CBS of spreading Beijing's propaganda tied to the Uyghur ethnic group. The publication describes the Xinjiang region as a happy home for the Uyghurs. He says the article aids the Chinese Communist Party's effort to, quote, obscure the truth. In a letter from the senator to a CBS News executive on Wednesday, he said, quote, CBS News chose to work with the propaganda department of a genocidal political party by publishing a puff piece that does more to obscure the truth rather than expose it. CBS News crews were invited to visit Xinjiang, where most Chinese Uyghurs live. The trip was organized by a Chinese information office, which many believe functions as a propaganda arm of the communist regime. The article CBS later published denies many reports that detail Beijing's suppression of the Uyghurs. As for why, CBS said its American news workers did not witness that suppression. Communist China faces multiple accusations linked to the Uyghurs on the world stage, including genocide, forced labor, and forced abandonment of ethnic culture and religion. Zooming out, Senator Rubio also warned that the process of creating the CBS story might have violated U.S. sanctions. That's by working with restricted Chinese state-run entities. The article, titled The Rebranding of Xinjiang by Elizabeth Palmer, was published early January. NTD reached out to CBS for comment, but did not hear back before airtime. Human Rights Watch releasing a warning for automakers with operations in China, urging them to make sure that materials involving forced labor are kept out of their supply chain. The automakers that were called out, Tesla, Volkswagen, and BYD. The human rights group said it found evidence that aluminum producers in Xinjiang hired workers from state-backed labor transfer programs. China uses aluminum produced in Xinjiang to manufacture automotive parts. Those parts then get sold to carmakers around the world. The companies are responsible under United Nations principles to ensure forced labor is not used in their supply chains. Xinjiang is China's #2 region for aluminum production. Volkswagen told Reuters that it takes a firm stance against forced labor and immediately investigated any allegations. Tesla did not respond to a query from Reuters. Toyota said it would closely review the Human Rights Watch report and that it expected suppliers to respect human rights. Tensions are rising between the U.S. and China as the potential for a Beijing invasion of Taiwan looms. How is Washington preparing for possible war? Here's a closer look. NTD's Dave Martin has the story.
Rewind to August 2023. A round of high-profile military drills between the U.S. and Australia were in full swing, called the Talisman Sabre exercises. They practiced amphibious landings, ground combat, and air operations. But besides deepening cooperation, they also held a discrete value. U.S. officials told Reuters that the drills created new stockpiles of military equipment that were left behind in Australia after the drills ended. It included roughly 330 vehicles and trailers and 130 containers in warehouses in southeastern Australia. That gear would prove enough to supply about 3 logistics companies with as many as 500 or more soldiers and could power a future drill, a natural disaster, or aid a war. The Pacific region would be one of the greatest choke points and potential vulnerabilities if conflict broke out over Taiwan. The move falls in line with efforts to shore up possible weak points and boost Western preparedness.
Is Taiwan bracing for potential division of its highest political power? President-elect William Lai is known for being tough on Beijing, but Taiwan's legislature elected a new speaker who's accused of being pro-Beijing. The speaker, Han Kuo-yu, denies the allegations. He's from the island's largest opposition party, the Kuomintang. He would be responsible for hosting visiting foreign lawmakers. Even though DPP secured a historic third term by William Lai's win, it lost its majority in the parliament. Some in Taiwan expressed concerns about a potential divisive government.
If the legislative yuan becomes a place where the Kuomintang controls the majority and holds the power of the president of the legislative yuan, doesn't that mean that our voices will be silenced again?
The legislative yuan is Taiwan's parliament. 2024 could mark a lot of uncertainties for Taiwan. It just elected a new president, a man that Beijing threatened would bring the island closer to war. Taiwan's biggest backer, the U.S., will also choose its leader this year. How will the next man in the Oval Office drive three-way relations between the U.S., China, and Taiwan?
I think if Biden's reelected, you'll see a lot of continuity. He's been fairly strong in signaling support for Taiwan, and I think that will probably continue. With Trump, who knows? I mean, I think one cannot easily project from a Trump first term to a Trump second term. I think it could be different in some way.
Taiwan's president-elect William Lai pledged to work closely with the U.S. and bolster Taiwan's defenses while on the campaign trail. Beijing claims Taiwan as part of China, despite never having ruled it. The U.S. is bound by law to sell arms to Taiwan so that it can defend itself. The power gap between the two sides is growing. China's defense budget stands at over $200 billion, 11 times that of Taiwan. Beijing also has over 2 million active duty service members, Taiwan 180,000. What's more, China has been expanding its nuclear arsenal. Taiwan does not have nuclear weapons. Bonnie Lin, director of the China Power Project, argues the U.S. should do more to make sure Taiwan can defend itself, taking that widening power gap into account. Speaking at a panel hosted by Taipei Economic and Cultural Office Tuesday, she cautioned it's a judgment every U.S. administration has to make about how much more Washington can do without triggering a major reaction from Beijing. She also added that after speaking to leading Taiwanese experts,
they're also more concerned of China using a variety of non-military means to coerce Taiwan.
Another expert cautioned that the U.S. should shore up a vulnerability in its own military posture.
China has developed missiles and submarines and so forth that have a possible ability to sink American aircraft carriers or with missiles to hit American air bases, even as far away as Guam, but also those bases in Japan. So the United States is in that sense vulnerable to Chinese attack.
He noted the U.S. military needs to disperse its forces to more locations instead of relying too much on concentrated areas of force. That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for more than 3 years. If you'd like to support us, consider donating. Find us at donorbox.org/China-in-focus or subscribe to our partner platform, Epic TV, where you can watch our full episodes. Here's what to look out for in our second half. Philippine submarines could soon dive into the disputed waters of the South China Sea, the country planning its first ever submarine purchase to counter Chinese aggression. A Hong Kong court has convicted 4 people of rioting charges during a pro-democracy movement in 2019. What happened that year? More on the events behind the so-called crimes. And a candid conversation with a prominent human rights advocate, dishing out some strong words about China.
Well, China's the worst in the world.
And after the break here on China in Focus. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. See you tomorrow.